March 25th, 1915, 1:30 in the afternoon, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A luxury suite on the 7th floor of the Bellevue Stratford Hotel. Outside, wet snow is turning to rain, typical for early spring on the East Coast. The room smells of stale air and expensive tobacco. But that scent cannot mask the metallic taste of impending death. In the center of the room, on a wide mahogany bed, lies a woman. Her skin has that specific waxy tint that doctors recognize as a harbinger of the end. This is Catherine Sweeney Hershey, the 43-year-old wife of one of the wealthiest men in America. Next to her, on a hard chair, sits a man whose name is already associated with the sweet taste of success, Milton Snavely Hershey. At this moment, his net worth approaches $60 million. Converted to modern currency, that is over $1.5 billion. But right now, these figures have no meaning whatsoever. Absolutely none. The silence is broken only by Catherine's heavy, intermittent breathing. The doctors standing in the corner of the room exchange silent glances. The diagnosis they tactfully called nervous exhaustion is actually a progressive disorder of the central nervous system. Early 20th century medicine is powerless. Milton Hershey, a man who built an entire city from scratch, who harnessed rivers of milk and created a chocolate empire, sits with his hands clasped, watching the only person he ever loved slowly fade away. Catherine opens her eyes. Her voice is barely audible. She asks for a glass of champagne. It is a strange, inappropriate request for a dying woman. But Milton springs to his feet instantly. He would buy her all the vineyards of France if it would make her smile. He rushes out into the hallway, giving orders to the staff. 3 minutes later, he returns. In his hand is a fogged glass with sparkling wine. He enters the room, hoping to see her gaze, but the room is filled with absolute silence. Her breathing has stopped. The doctors have lowered their heads. Milton freezes in the doorway. The glass slips from his fingers. The sound of crystal shattering on parquet echoes like a gunshot in an empty church. Champagne spreads across the floor. Catherine Hershey is dead. At that moment, 150 kilometers from the Philadelphia Hotel, on top of a hill in the town of Hershey, stands the High Point Mansion. 22 rooms, a majestic limestone facade. Huge windows look out onto the smoking chimneys of the chocolate factory. Servants in the house continue to polish the silver and rub the floors, preparing for the mistress's return. They do not yet know that this house will never again be a home in the full sense of the word. From this second, High Point transforms from a family nest into a mausoleum. Milton Hershey does not scream. He does not cry in public. He simply stands and looks at his wife's body. The story we are accustomed to perceiving as a sweet fairy tale about a chocolate king actually begins here, in this cold hotel room, in a puddle of spilled champagne. This is not a story of success. It is a story of how a man builds a paradise on earth to escape the hell within himself. And the High Point Mansion rising above the town will become the main witness to this silent tragedy. In a few hours, Catherine's body will be placed in a coffin and sent by train back to the city bearing her husband's name. Milton will follow. He will return to the house he built for her, enter her bedroom, and order that nothing be changed. Not a single thing. Catherine's death is the starting point. To understand why this pragmatic industrialist, this tough capitalist, would suddenly begin to act in ways that contradict business logic, we need to turn back time. We need to understand the poverty and dirt from which he rose, to comprehend the height from which he has just fallen. We travel back to the year 1857, to a world with no chocolate, only hard labor, religious dogma, and a father who taught Milton the main lesson. Dreams are expensive, but failure is free. The year 1857. Central Pennsylvania, a rural backwater called Derry Church. There are no factories, no asphalt, no electricity here, only endless mud, hard manual labor, and the stern faces of the Mennonites. These are people who reject progress for piety. In their world, pleasure borders on sin. It is here, on September 13th, that Milton Snavely Hershey is born, the only surviving child of Veronica Fanny Snavely and Henry Hershey. To understand why this man would later build a palace on a hill, one must look at the house where he grew up. This is not a house. It is a battlefield, a battle of two opposing philosophies that tore Milton apart from his earliest childhood. On one side is his mother, Fanny Snavely, a tough, down-to-earth woman raised in the strict discipline of the Reformed Mennonite Church. She wears a modest cap, economizes on matches, and believes only in what she can touch with her hands: land, money, and the Bible. For her, life is suffering and accumulation. On the other side is his father, Henry Hershey, a man of catastrophe, a dreamer who always looked for the easy way out. Henry was the kind of man who would plant an orchard, but lacked the patience to wait for the harvest. He tried to drill for oil when everyone else was searching for gold. He grew berries when the market demanded grain. He was a walking guide on how to lose everything. The family moved dozens of times, fleeing from debts and Henry's empty promises. Young Milton grew up in the epicenter of this war. His mother demanded stability. His father demanded risk. The irony of fate is that Milton would take the worst and the best from both. From his mother, he inherited iron discipline and a hatred of waste. From his father, an insane ability to see horizons inaccessible to others. His education ends in the 4th grade. This is an important detail. Milton Hershey, the future industrial magnate, could barely write properly. He attended at least 7 different schools as his family moved constantly, never staying anywhere long enough for roots to take hold. At 14, his father gets him an apprenticeship at a print shop with Sam Ernst, a local printer who published a German-English newspaper. Henry wants his son to become an intellectual, a newspaper editor. But Milton hates the smell of ink. He does what becomes his first act of rebellion. He intentionally drops his hat into the printing press, jamming the expensive machine. He is fired in disgrace. His mother, Fanny, takes matters into her own hands. In 1872, she arranges for him to work for a local confectioner, Joseph Royer, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And here, among the smells of vanilla and burnt sugar, Milton understands. This is his language. Candy is not just food. It is a currency of joy, understood by everyone. But the path up was not a straight line. It was a series of catastrophic falls that would have broken anyone else. The year 1876, Philadelphia. The city hums. The centennial of the United States. The World's Fair. 19-year-old Milton borrows money from his aunt, Mattie Snavely, and opens his first candy shop. He works 16 hours a day. He makes the candy himself at night and sells it during the day. But he makes a rookie mistake. He cannot count. Expenses exceed income. After 6 years of grueling labor, he is bankrupt. His mother's family is furious. The Snavely clan's money is gone. Milton flees. He travels to Denver, Colorado, following his father, who is once again seeking his fortune. And it is in Denver, among the miners and the dirt, that a key event occurs, one that will change the industry. Milton gets a job with a local confectioner and discovers a secret unknown in the East: the use of fresh milk. Fresh milk makes the caramel soft and extends its shelf life. This was a technological revelation. Emboldened, he goes to Chicago. Failure, he goes to New York. Failure. Finally, he ends up back in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The year 1883, he borrows money again. At 29, Milton Hershey looks like a ghost. His relatives cross the street to avoid greeting him. He is the family's disgrace. He is another Henry Hershey, a failure who squandered the family's money. Even his mother, Fanny, looks at him with skepticism. But in this humiliation, at this point of absolute zero, Milton forms the philosophy that will become the foundation of his empire. He understands that talent does not matter. Luck does not matter. The only thing that matters is the ability to get up one more time than you fall. He stopped being a dreamer. He became a calculator of survival. He borrows the last of his money from a former employee who took pity on him. He has no room for error. He starts making caramel using the Denver recipe with fresh milk. In 1886, he founds the Lancaster Caramel Company. He lives in one room with his mother and aunt. During the day, he makes caramel, and at night he loads crates. And suddenly, it works. An English candy importer tries his caramel and places an order for an enormous amount. The bank's cashier, so impressed by Milton's determination, backs the loan with his own signature. Milton delivers the order. The check is paid. By the early 1890s, Milton Hershey employs over 1,300 workers. He is a millionaire. His Crystal A caramel is sold all over the world. He has won. He has proven to everyone that he is not Henry. He has built a successful business. He has money, respect, status. But for Milton, this is not enough. In 1893, he goes to the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. There, in the German pavilion, he sees something that makes his heart beat faster. Large machines for producing chocolate. Chocolate at that time was an elite product available only to wealthy Europeans. The Swiss held a monopoly. Milton looks at the dark, thick mass flowing from the machines and makes a decision that seems like madness to his partners. He says, caramel is just a fad, but chocolate is forever. He buys all the German equipment right at the exhibition and brings it to Pennsylvania. He plans to sell his successful caramel company to bet everything on a product that no one in America knows how to mass produce. This is not just a business strategy. This is an obsession. He wants to democratize luxury. He wants to make chocolate accessible to the working class. But for this, he needs more than just a factory. He needs a partner. He needs someone to give meaning to this race from money. It is at this moment, as he stands on the threshold of the greatest transformation of his life, that a young woman with red hair and an infectious laugh appears in a confectionery shop in Jamestown, New York. Catherine Sweeney, the woman who will change everything. The year 1898, Jamestown, New York. The air hangs with the smell of confectioner's glaze and social change. It is here that a collision of two worlds occurs, one that will forever change the trajectory of Milton Hershey's life. Until this moment, Milton was a typical product of his upbringing. Stern, closed, dressed in gray suits, living by the clock. He is 40. He is a confirmed bachelor. His mother, Fanny, controls every aspect of his life, creating a protective cocoon of Mennonite asceticism around her son. In her worldview, a wife is an unnecessary asset, a distraction from work. But Catherine Sweeney, known as Kitty, is the complete opposite of everything Milton has known. She is 26, she is Irish, she is Catholic. She worked at A.D. Works Confectionery, where she met Milton during one of his sales trips. In the social hierarchy of late 19th century Pennsylvania, this union was not just a misalliance. It was a scandal, a Protestant industrialist and the daughter of working-class Irish Catholics. It was oil and water. But Milton, a man accustomed to calculating risks, commits the most irrational act of his life. On May 25, 1898, they are secretly married in New York at the rectory of St. Patrick's Cathedral. No lavish ceremony, no reporters. It was an act of intimate rebellion. Kitty's appearance transforms Milton. People who had known him for years noted remarkable changes. The tough businessman starts to smile. He changes his old-fashioned suits for more elegant ones. For the first time in his life, he begins to spend money not on machines, but on experiences. She loves theaters, flowers, travel. She becomes his only window into the world of emotions, which had been boarded up since childhood. Her nickname for him was "My Little Dutchman," and he personally picked out a daily arrangement of fresh flowers for her each morning, even when they were traveling. It is this emotional upswing that pushes Milton toward his greatest strategic maneuver. August 10th, 1900. Milton Hershey makes a move that makes Wall Street choke on its morning coffee. He sells his gold mine, the Lancaster Caramel Company. The buyer is his main competitor, the American Caramel Company. The deal is for $1 million. To understand the scale, the average worker's salary at the time was about $450 a year. Milton receives a sum for which an ordinary person would have to work more than 2,000 years. His competitors celebrate their victory. They think they have taken Hershey off the board. They believe he will retire, buy a yacht, and take his young wife sailing around Europe. But they missed one detail in the contract. Milton retained the right to produce chocolate. He did not leave the game. He simply shed the ballast to build a rocket. Caramel is just a fad, he tells his lawyers. Chocolate is forever. Now he has $1 million in Kitty. But he has no house, and he has no land for a new factory. Milton returns to where he fled. Derry Church, to the very backwater where he was born in the dirt. His logic is flawless and ruthless. He needs a huge amount of fresh milk for milk chocolate production. In cities, milk is scarce and spoils quickly. In Derry Church, there are thousands of cows and clean water. In 1903, the greatest construction in Pennsylvania begins. Milton is not just building a factory. He is building a utopia. He had seen the industrial slums of England and hated them. He decides his workers will live not in barracks, but in brick houses with lawns. This is pragmatic altruism. A happy worker works better. But the jewel of this new world will not be the factory. It will be the house for Kitty. Milton hires architect C. Emlyn Urban, a noted Lancaster architect who had also designed the original chocolate factory. The task is simple and ambitious: to build a mansion that will symbolize their triumph. The location is chosen strategically, on top of a hill with a view of the factory under construction. The place is called High Point. Here begins architectural psychology. High Point was not conceived as a palace for parties. It was a fortress for two. A contract for the mansion was signed in 1905, but construction was delayed until early 1906. In 1905, the factory begins production. For the first time in American history, milk chocolate becomes a mass product. A bar costs 5 cents. This is a revolution. Money flows like a river faster than Milton can count. At the same time, the walls of High Point rise. 22 rooms, a limestone facade in the colonial and Greek revival style, a huge veranda wrapping around the house. Milton wants Kitty to feel like a queen. He plans gardens that will overshadow everything she has seen in Europe. The cost of constructing the building itself, as recorded in an invoice from architect Urban, was $53,433. With furniture, landscaping, and decor, this sum rose to approximately $100,000. Compared with the homes of other wealthy industrialists, the mansion was modest, both in size and appointments. It had few rooms, no bar, no swimming pool. George Vanderbilt, for comparison, spent an estimated $10 million on his 250-room mansion, Biltmore, in Asheville, North Carolina. But while workers lay the parquet and install the stained glass, the first invisible crack appears in the foundation of this ideal life. Kitty begins to get tired. At first, this is blamed on acclimatization, on the stress of moving. Sometimes her hands tremble. Sometimes she loses her balance on level ground. Milton, absorbed in the launch of the factory, tries not to notice. He buys her off with gifts. He believes that the fresh air of Dairy Church, the luxury of the new house, and the absence of everyday problems will cure everything. He builds High Point not just as a home. He builds it as a gilded cage in which he hopes to hide his happiness from the cruelty of the world. In 1908, the construction of the mansion is completed. Milton and Catherine Hershey move into their new home. It is a monumental structure. It stands on the hill like an observation post. Below, the chimneys of the factory smoke, producing tons of chocolate a day. Above, there is silence and luxury. To understand Milton Hershey's psychology, one must not just look at High Point, but look out from it. The house is not located by chance. Architect Urban designed it so that the facade looks directly at the chocolate factory. This is the architectural embodiment of control. Every morning, stepping onto the veranda with a cup of coffee, Milton saw not just a landscape. He saw the smoking chimneys, the railroad tracks, and the thousands of workers heading to their machines. His house was the bridge of a ship. His factory was the ship. Between them was an unbreakable umbilical cord of ambition. The first thing that strikes a guest crossing the threshold is not gold or marble. It is light and air. Unlike the heavy, stuffy Victorian mansions of that time, where each room was an isolated box, the first floor of High Point was designed revolutionarily. It is what we today call an open floor plan. The hall flows seamlessly into the living room into the dining room. There are no doors between them. It is a direct challenge to Milton's childhood, spent in cramped, dark rooms steeped in the fear of poverty. Here, the walls are pushed apart. Here, one can breathe easily. The interior is a dialogue between two personalities. The massive wooden panels of oak and chestnut are Milton. Reliability, strength, earth. The stained glass windows by the Rudy Glass Company of York. The elegant furniture, the Art Nouveau flourishes. These are Kitty. Color, lightness, dream. Every detail here shouts about status, but in a whisper. The circular entry hall was specially designed to showcase a cut glass torchiere, which Milton had first seen at the 1893 Columbian Exposition in Chicago. He paid $5,000 for it. Some of the furniture and much of the china had been bought by the Hersheys on their travels abroad or on shopping excursions to Philadelphia and New York. Only 3 or 4 staff members worked for the Hersheys at any one time: a housekeeper, a houseman, a maid, and a chauffeur. But go a little further into the palm room, the winter garden. This is the heart of the house. Glass walls, exotic plants, wicker furniture. Kitty spent hours here, looking at her beloved roses in the garden. Behind the house was a small arbor by a flower-bordered pool into which a fountain tossed a jet of water. She used to sit there for hours, moving only when a gust of wind blew the spray over her. This space is created for life, but it is steeped in ringing. Silence. Here we encounter the main paradox of High Point. This house was designed for noise, for children's laughter, for running up and down the stairs, for large receptions. The dining room is designed for dozens of guests. The billiard room waits for noisy companies of men with cigars. But historical records are ruthless. There were almost never loud parties here. Milton and Kitty lived here alone, surrounded by a staff of servants. Servants recalled that a culture of silence reigned in the house. The floors were covered with thick Persian carpets that absorbed the sound of footsteps. Why? Because any sharp sound could cause Kitty to have a migraine or a nervous episode. The house became a golden isolator. Go up the wide staircase to the second floor. Here, the psychology of architecture changes. If the first floor is a demonstration of success, the second is a zone of struggle. Kitty's bedroom painted a soft pink in keeping with her taste. Milton's bedroom, and empty rooms, guest rooms that rarely had guests, and rooms that could have been nurseries. The furniture in Kitty's bedroom was bought during their travels through Europe. A canopied bed, a vanity with many perfume bottles. But the more luxurious the setting became, the more obvious the tragedy. Mirrors reflected a woman who was fading. Fireplaces burning whole logs could not warm her perpetually cold hands, a symptom of impaired circulation and nervous system damage. Milton often sat in his office, surrounded by invoices and sales growth charts. Chocolate sales were doubling every year. His net worth was growing geometrically. But every time he climbed the stairs to his wife's bedroom, he felt utterly powerless. The strongest contrast at High Point is the sensory dissonance. If you open a window, the sweet, cloying smell of chocolate rushes into the room. The whole town smells of cocoa. This is the smell of money, the smell of success. But inside the house, behind closed windows, it smells of medicine and wax. Outside, at the foot of the hill, life is bustling. The factory runs 3 shifts. An amusement park is being built. Schools, banks, and stores are being built. Milton is creating the perfect city. But in the center of this city, on the highest point, stands a palace where time has stood still. High Point is not just a rich man's house. It is Milton's attempt to buy normality. He thought that if he built the perfect stage set, then life's script would become perfect. If the walls were thick enough, the disease would not penetrate inside. If he filled the rooms with beautiful things, the sadness would leave. But architecture does not heal. By 1909, just a year after moving in, it became clear this house was too big for 2 and too empty for 1. It is here, in this silence, that a decision is born that will turn the fate of not only Hershey's capital, but also thousands of lives upside down. The realization that the children's rooms will remain empty forever leads Milton to a moral crossroads. He stands at the window, looks at the city that bears his name, and understands. If he cannot have his own children, then the children of others shall become his. The medical verdict is clear, even if it is not discussed aloud at dinner parties. Kitty's illness is a terrible, destructive condition. It takes away coordination, causes piercing pains, and slowly kills the nervous system. But the cruelest consequence for the Hershey family is infertility. Milton Hershey, a man who built a factory capable of producing 50,000 pounds of chocolate a day, has hit a biological dead end. His bloodline will end with him, his empire, his millions, his city. There is no one to pass it on to. Here we see Milton's moral dualism. Another oligarch in his place might have divorced. He might have found a mistress who would bear him an heir. This was the norm for the industrial barons of that time, but Milton makes a choice that does not fit the logic of capitalism. November 15th, 1909. Milton and Catherine Hershey sign a document that will forever change the fate of their capital. They establish what was then called the Hershey Industrial School. At this time, the school has only 4 students. They are orphan boys who, like Milton once had, have nothing. They live not in a golden mansion, but in a nearby old farmhouse on the estate where Milton himself was born, the homestead. This decision is a cry of despair turned into a strategy. Kitty, understanding that she will never become a mother, asks her husband, "Let us care for other children, since we cannot have our own." When asked years later why he started the school, Milton would answer simply, "It was Kitty's idea." Catherine worked closely with Prudence Copenhaver, wife of the school's first superintendent, planning the home life program, including menus, clothing, and social skills. She insisted the deed of trust include a provision that the children would not be clothed in uniforms or other kinds of distinctive dress. She wanted them to feel like individuals, not inmates. Meanwhile, the shadow of death draws ever closer, and sometimes it takes the most unexpected forms. December 1911. Milton and Kitty leave for France to begin an extended tour of Europe, spending most of the winter in Nice. The sunshine and warm sea breezes seem to help Catherine feel better. Milton, accustomed to the best, plans to return home on the maiden voyage of the most luxurious liner of the era. On December 18, 1911, he writes a check to the White Star Line in the amount of $300 as a deposit for a VIP suite. The ship's name is the Titanic. The tickets are ready. The suitcases are almost packed. But at the last moment, the plans change. Milton was forced to change his plans at the last minute to attend to a business matter that required his attention in the town of Hershey, rather than wait until April 10th. When Titanic was scheduled to leave from Cherbourg, France, he instead booked passage on the German liner SS America, leaving France on April 6th and arriving in New York on April 7th. Catherine remained in Europe, accompanied by traveling companions. Ironically, on a subsequent voyage, it would be the America that notified Titanic of large icebergs in the North Atlantic on the morning of April 14th, a warning ignored by the captain of Titanic. April 14th, 1912. When the America is already approaching the shores of New York, the Titanic collides with an iceberg and sinks to the bottom. Milton Hershey learns about this upon landing. The check for $300, which he never cashed, remained in the archives of the White Star Line as a silent witness to how thin the line was between life and death. Fate spared him. But for what? This incident strengthens in Milton a sense of providentialism. He begins to believe that his life was spared for a higher purpose. He survived to work. But this incident does not save Kitty. Her salvation from the icy waters of the Atlantic only prolonged her suffering on land. The period from 1912 to 1915 is a time of slow agony within the walls of High Point. Kitty rarely leaves the house. Her legs give out. Her hands tremble so badly that she cannot hold a cup. Milton hires the best doctors. He sends her to sanatoriums. But when medicine is powerless, he turns to the language of symbols. Every day, in any weather, he instructs the gardeners to cut the best roses from the greenhouse and bring them to her room. The house is flooded with flowers. It is an attempt to drown out the smell of illness with the scent of life. Neighbors and factory workers saw a strange sight. The powerful magnate whom competitors feared, sitting for hours by his wife's bed, reading to her or simply holding her hand. In these moments, he was not a businessman. He was just a helpless man. But there is another side to the coin. As Kitty fades, Milton's business experiences aggressive growth. He expands his product line. He builds new factories. It seems he sublimates his grief into concrete and steel. The weaker Kitty becomes, the stronger the Hershey Corporation becomes. This is a cruel law of conservation of energy. Life leaves the person and flows into the system. By the beginning of 1915, doctors advise a change of scenery. The winter in Pennsylvania is too harsh. Milton takes Kitty to Philadelphia, to the Bellevue Stratford Hotel. They hope that city doctors can help, or at least ease the pain. They leave High Point. The servants cover the furniture in the living room with sheets. The windows are draped. The house plunges into darkness, as if sensing that its mistress will never cross its threshold again. Milton, boarding the train to Philadelphia, looks back at his mansion on the hill. It looks like a fortress. But now it is the most vulnerable point on the map. All his millions, all his stocks, all his factories have shrunk to the size of one hotel room where the fate of his heart is being decided. We return to where we began, to March 1915. The circle is closed, but now we know the price of this tragedy. We know that Kitty's death is not just the loss of a wife. It is the loss of the only person who made Milton Hershey a living man, not a function of capital. After Kitty's funeral in the spring of 1915, Milton Hershey returns to the house he built for her and does what psychologists would call pathological denial. He preserves time. He instructs the staff to leave his wife's rooms untouched. Her dresses still hang in the closets. Her hairbrush lies on the vanity at the same angle. Every day, fresh roses are changed in her bedroom, as if she has just stepped into the garden and is about to return. But the silence in the house becomes deafening. 22 rooms designed for life now amplify the loneliness of one man. Milton wanders the corridors at night. The servants hear his footsteps. He cannot sleep. He is a workaholic who has lost his purpose. He used to earn money to impress her. He used to build to provide for her comfort. Now that the recipient is gone, why is this giant money-making machine needed? The outside world is also going mad at this time. World War I is raging, a global crisis. Prices for sugar, the main ingredient of his empire, are skyrocketing. Markets are unstable. Any other capitalist in this situation would have clung to his assets with a death grip, trying to save every cent. But Milton Hershey does the exact opposite. The tragedy triggers a mechanism of radical transformation in him. He begins to look at his wealth not as a reward, but as a heavy burden that must be cast off. November 13th, 1918. 3 years after his wife's death and just 2 days after the end of World War I, Milton summons his lawyers to his office. The meeting takes place in the strictest secrecy. No press, no photographers. On the table lies a document. It is a deed of transfer of ownership. Milton Hershey takes a pen and commits perhaps the largest act of philanthropy in the history of private business of that time. He transfers 5,000 shares of equity stock, the entire controlling block of the Hershey Chocolate Company, to a trust fund for the boarding school for orphans. Consider the numbers. The value of the transferred assets is estimated at $60 million. Converted to today's rate, that is a sum exceeding billions. But what is shocking is not the amount. What is shocking is the completeness of the giving. He does not give part of the profits. He does not give a tithe. He gives everything. From this second, the factory smoking beneath the windows of High Point is no longer his. The land on which the town stands is no longer his. The brand known throughout the world is no longer his. Legally, Milton Hershey, the creator of the empire, becomes a salaried manager working for orphans. Why did he do it? And why secretly? The world would only learn of this act 5 years later, when a journalist from the New York Times would accidentally unearth the story. When asked about his motives, Milton would answer dryly, without pause. "I have no heirs. These are my boys." Here we see the final reinterpretation of Kitty's role. From a tragic figure, a victim of illness, she becomes the invisible architect of this decision. If she had been healthy, if they had had their own children, this capital would have gone to them. The school would most likely have remained a small charitable project. But it was her death and the lack of direct heirs that transformed private capital into public property. Her emptiness filled the lives of thousands of other children. But what about High Point? The mansion becomes a witness to the strange life of its master after 1918. Milton, having given away $60 million, begins to economize on trifles in his personal life. He walks through the huge house and turns off the lights in empty rooms to avoid running up the electric meter. He wears his suits until they begin to shine with wear. Paradox. A man who feeds, clothes, and educates thousands of children lives in a ghost house, feeling like a stranger there. The grandeur of High Point begins to weigh on him. The luxurious dining room, crystal chandeliers, marble fireplaces. All of this was created for a life with Kitty. Without her, these things lose their meaning. They become simple, expensive props in a play that ended long ago. In the 1920s, Milton increasingly leaves the house. He travels to Cuba, where he builds another sugar refinery and mills. He tries to escape the silence of High Point. Each time he returns, he feels the walls closing in. By the end of the decade, the situation becomes unbearable. The huge mansion requires immense resources to maintain. A staff of servants, heating, repairs. For Milton, who now counts every penny as orphan money, this becomes a moral problem. How can he live like a king when these funds could go toward building new wings for the school? In 1930, the denouement of the relationship between the man and his house arrives. Milton Hershey makes a decision that puts an end to the history of High Point as a living space. He is 73 years old. He is alone. He is tired of the echo of his own footsteps in 22 rooms. He summons the management of the local country club and makes a proposal. Take the house, make it a clubhouse for golfers, and leave me a small apartment on the second floor. This seems like madness. To give a palace over to locker rooms and a restaurant, and to squeeze oneself into a couple of rooms. But for Milton, it is a liberation. He sheds the stage set. He keeps only the bare necessities. Kitty's furniture, her things, her memory. Everything is packed up or remains as part of the club's interior, turning into museum exhibits while their owner is still alive. This is how the final act of this drama begins. The great chocolate king, a living legend, a man whose name is written on millions of rappers worldwide, voluntarily becomes a tenant in his own mansion. Downstairs on the first floor, golfers drink cocktails, laugh, and clang their clubs. A foreign life thrives there. And upstairs, in a small room, an old man looks out the window at his factory and the school that grows every year. He has renounced his right to own everything. The factory, the money, and finally, his own home. This renunciation is not a defeat. It is the highest form of freedom. The transformation is complete. Milton Hershey has ceased to be a businessman. He has become a custodian. October 13th, 1945. Hershey Hospital in the town of Hershey. In a small room, a man who forever changed humanity's taste habits is dying. He is 88 years old. On his bedside table, there are no gold watches or stacks of stock certificates. There is only one photograph. A photograph of Kitty. Milton Hershey passes away at 10 o'clock in the morning, as quietly as he had lived his final years, without pomp. He left no personal accounts in Swiss banks. He has no yachts docked in Monaco. At the time of his death, his personal net worth was surprisingly modest for a man of his stature. His will was only 3 paragraphs long, and what he personally owned amounted to approximately $900,000. Everything else he had earned already belonged to him no longer. The community of Hershey came to a standstill. On October 16th, Milton Hershey's body lay in state in the foyer of the school he had founded. A steady stream of his townspeople made their way up the hill to honor the man and his memory. Each had a story to tell about MS, as he was fondly known. The funeral service was held in the auditorium of the school. 8 of his boys, from the senior class, were chosen to be his pallbearers. He was laid to rest next to his beloved Catherine in Hershey Cemetery. But what became of High Point? If you come to Hershey, Pennsylvania today, you will see this mansion. It still rises above the town. Its limestone facade is still flawless. But its purpose has changed in the most paradoxical way imaginable. Today, High Point is the headquarters of the Hershey Trust Company. It is the nerve center of one of the world's wealthiest charitable organizations. It is here, in the very rooms where the silence of a childless marriage once echoed, that decisions are now made that influence the fates of thousands of children. The irony of fate here reaches the scale of classical tragedy. A house built for a family that could not have children now manages a capital that provides for the lives of over 2,000 students annually. Kitty's bedroom, where she faded from illness, and Milton's study, where he signed the deed of gift, are now the offices of people who manage a fund worth over $17 billion. Consider that figure. $17 billion. This is more than the budgets of many small countries. This is more than the endowments of most Ivy League universities. And all this money serves one purpose which Milton and Kitty defined in 1909: to give a home to those who have none. Milton Hershey achieved the impossible. He created a business structure protected from greed. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, financial sharks have repeatedly tried to buy out or absorb the Hershey Company. They offered astronomical sums, but every time they hit an insurmountable wall. The controlling block of voting shares belongs to the trust, and the trust is obligated to follow Milton's will. The profits must go to the school. In essence, the dead hand of Milton Hershey still manages the empire from the grave. He did not just leave money. He left a law. His will was written so skillfully that even 80 years after his death, no one can destroy his utopia for the sake of quick profit. The story of High Point and Milton Hershey is a mirror image of the story of the Great Gatsby, but with a different ending. Like Fitzgerald's hero, Milton built a castle for love. Like Gatsby, he tried to use wealth to rewrite reality. But if Gatsby was destroyed by his dream, Hershey found his way out through the renunciation of ownership. He understood a truth that is inaccessible to most billionaires. Money is not a goal, but a fertilizer. If you just hoard it, it starts to stink like manure. But if you scatter it, it can grow a garden. And this garden is very real. The Hershey Gardens, founded by Milton, are still in bloom today. The rose garden he created for Kitty has expanded to 23 acres. Thousands of people come there. But few of the tourists taking selfies against the backdrop of the flowers understand that every bush here is a monument to the pain of one specific woman and the love of one specific man. In his later years, Milton would often have his chauffeur drive him to the gardens just to sit with Kitty's roses. What does this story teach us today? In a world where success is measured by the number of followers and the size of a bank account, Milton Hershey offers another metric: A legacy is not what you leave for yourself. Monuments, towers with your name. A legacy is what you leave behind when your name no longer matters. Milton could have remained in history simply as the chocolate king. Another rich man like Rockefeller or Carnegie. But he became something more. He became a father to thousands of children he never saw. Every graduate of the Milton Hershey School is a living continuation of his life. Every child saved from poverty thanks to chocolate money is a victory over the very dirt and hopelessness in which Milton himself was born in 1857. High Point stands today. No one sleeps in it. There is no fire in them. There is fireplace to warm its mistress. But it is not dead. It is filled with a meaning denser than any matter. When you next unwrap a bar of Hershey's chocolate in its brown wrapper, remember, you are holding in your hands not just a sweet. You are holding in your hands a small brick of an enormous fortress built on a foundation of love and loss. You are not paying for cocoa beans. You are financing the most grandiose attempt of one man to correct the injustice of the universe. The sweet taste of chocolate is just a disguise. Inside is a bitter story, that the greatest things in this world are created not from an abundance of happiness, but from an attempt to fill a void that cannot be filled by anything else. Milton Hershey died with only a photograph of his wife in his possession, but he left behind a world that became a little warmer than the one he entered. And perhaps that is the only real success available to a person.